All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the Hammer and Chisel Performance Podcast. I'm your host, John Heck. Now, before we dive into the episode, I just want to give a quick shout out to the episode's sponsor, Troponin Supplements, keeping me decked out in the apparel with the sleeveless bodybuilding jersey. And of course, every podcast, I'm loaded up with the ATP supplement. Coach, you would love this supplement. It's a big dose of caffeine. It's got a nootropic, just stimulates focus, memory enhancement, mood. Not that you need any of those things artificially boosted, but I take one of these before every podcast. So guys, check out Troponin Supplements. Use code HECK at checkout for a discount on that. Now, anyway, diving into this episode. So we're going to take things over to the sports performance realm, getting into football strength and conditioning. So the man I have on right now is someone I know personally and know him professionally. He is the director of strength and performance at Troy University with the football team. And he's just someone that I have the utmost respect for as a coach, as a leader, and as a man. And I had the honor of working for him, and I learned a lot from him. So I'm excited that you guys will get to learn some from him as well. So Coach Darl Bauer, thank you for joining the show.
Hey, John, it's awesome to be on. I appreciate the kind words. It's just good to see your face, and excited to just get back to talking training.
I know I've missed it a lot. You know, you and I were talking off the air, and of course I stepped away from football for my own personal reasons, but it's leaving the staff that we had, just you and Coach Portavina and Sed and all the guys on the staff and the players. It was hard to walk away from that. We had a good thing going.
We really did. And that's where, I think that's, and we talked about staff building, but, that's your team. And, the people that you surround yourself with every day, I mean, that's a direct correlation to like how happy I am when I go home to my wife, Carly, and our 3 kids is, if I'm around, men that are good workers and hard workers and that are dependable and passionate, that's equally as important to me as, what their skill set is oftentimes. And that's, we had that for sure. And we've got a good, we've got a great staff right now as well. But like when it was with you and those guys, we had 2 GAs that weren't really GAs, they were performed their butt. But yeah, man, for sure.
Well, Coach, true to form, would expect nothing less from you. As soon as we turn on the cameras, you're wiping sweat off. I know you're just attacking a tire flip workout out there with some of the staff. So you guys are getting after it over there a little bit?
Yeah. We had Porch and I once a week have been, flipping tires and going outside, getting outside. And, it's like one of those things where obviously when you're coaching, like right now we're staff meeting at 4:45 to set up, and then we're setting up, and then we got 3 lift groups, 6, 8, and 10, with field and, coach on the floor, weight room wise. So, for that period, like my mind is not stopped from a decision-making standpoint, and just, quote unquote, the bandwidth is very high. And, sometimes you get done, it's like, let's just go flip some tires.
Hell yeah.
Let's do something that like
Arctic.
I think. They don't want to think, don't want to have to go and, count a bunch of reps and look at percentage charts anymore. So, we did 4 sets of 10 on the 600 tire and supersetted that with some 100-pound slam ball carries up our plyo ramp. So it's good, very good.
Oh, yeah, I love that. Well, Coach, I know you've got a jam-packed, busy schedule, so we'll kind of go ahead and dive right into all this. Do you mind giving my audience just a quick background and bio on yourself?
No doubt. So, I'm 39 now. I'll turn 40 here in a few weeks, which is like crazy.
Yeah.
I made sure to shave today, so I look younger.
You're looking sharp. You're looking sharp.
When the beard comes out, I got some little grays there starting to pop out. But no, I'm really blessed and fortunate that I found my passion early on. I was 15 years old, going to University of Michigan football camps, just trying to be the best player I could be. And, their strength coach that was there, Mike Gittleson, was there, and he took us through, just like everybody, he would calmly tell 200 players to go into the weight room and grab a plate. You could grab a 5, 10, 25, 35, 45, whatever, and then come back to the baseball field And then he basically took us through PT for an hour, just the whole 200, just with a megaphone calmly. And as guys would quit or they would sit the plate down, he'd make them go to the back. And if you were working, he would pull you up to the front, and by the end of it, I'd kind of worked my way to the front of the line and had a 45-pound plate. And, the competitive nature and the wrestler in me, like that was always wanted to, challenge myself. And I remember asking him later on, I got the courage up to go talk to him. Cause when you're 15, like to a grown man coach, like you're thinking, I don't want to talk, and I remember asking him, hey, what's your real job? And he was like, well, this is my job, son. This is it. Like, I didn't even know that a strength coach existed. So when I was 15, I realized like, that's what I was going to do. So, I wrestled in high school, ran track and played football. I played Division II football at Hillsdale College. Got a great degree in education there. Really challenging liberal arts school. And then I got a graduate assistant position at West Virginia. And I did my master's I double packed it and did my master's in 1 year. And then Mike Joseph was one of my mentors, hired me full time when I was 23, 24. So I've been full time, over 15, 16 years now. And, kind of worked my way from graduate assistant up to assistant, worked with almost every sport at West Virginia. And worked my way up to assistant director, and I helped form a sports science supply performance department there with the Rockefeller Neuroscience Institute, which I think gave me a good global background on sports science and what that means for strength coaches and the development of humans and monitoring all the different data points that come along with that. And then I always wanted to be a head strength coach. I always wanted to lead and be able to develop a staff and develop a culture. And, some opportunities came up while I was at West Virginia, but I was happy. I was developing, I was learning, I was growing, and I just got married and didn't want to leave for anything that wasn't a sure thing. And, the Houston opportunity came open and I took that. And, from there, that was first time I was a head strength coach was at the University of Houston for 5 years, which is where I got to cross paths with you. That one day where the Texas staff came and visited, and I'm sure we'll touch on that and how we got connected, but 5 great years there and got to train a lot of, exceptional athletes and guys in draft picks and got to develop a culture there. And then, things didn't go as you'd like them to go. And, got let go, which my daughter Gigi she won't accept that I got fired. Even though it's the profession that we go, she says, you didn't get fired, Daddy, you got disqualified. You only get fired if you did something wrong. I'm like, well, we didn't win enough games. So, but, like ended up connecting with Jared Parker here at Troy. And, it's been an awesome experience here. It's all the things, like if you love coaching and you love college football, Troy is a great place to do that and to work, so that's the trajectory, from where I was high school and through college. And, I still feel like I'm like in my prime, trying to stay young and
yeah, you are.
Hope to do it for another 20 to 25. So I'll be around there with a limp and a fanny pack here, right here years.
Exactly. Well, I'll give the quick story on how we met. So I was working with the Houston Texans at the time, and during the off season, the Texans strength staff and myself, we took a visit over out your way at the University of Houston, and we sat in and observed the team lift that you were running. And I was watching it, and I was just like, man, I just really like what they have going on here. Just watching you, the way you coached, the way you commanded the room, the culture that you had clearly established within the team, all the systems you had in place, and then getting the opportunity to just sit down afterwards and just talk shop with you and get to know you a little bit. So you definitely made an impression on me. And then fast forward several months, we're deep in the season. We're going into our final game of the regular season with the playoffs coming up. And I remember getting a text. It was the Thursday of game week, and you had just taken the position at Troy. and you were looking for an assistant director. And you'd reached out to me, and we got to talking, kind of over the phone interview. And, you had been, I had had some referrals or recommendations sent out your way. And ultimately you extended the offer to me. And then, I had about 24 hours to make a decision. I mean, you had to build your staff. You were about to get rolling with an entirely brand new staff at Troy. And so I come home one night talking to my wife, and I'm like, hey, I know we kind of just moved here to Houston, and we're just now building a life here, but how would you like to move to deep South Alabama and take a new job? So, I mean, the football world, it moves fast. I got the text from you on a Thursday, and I was in the truck arriving in Troy on Tuesday. So very fast turnaround. And then, we had the challenge of joining a team where their entire staff had just left, and the players are feeling some type of way about that. They love that staff. They had just won a championship with that staff, and they felt a little bit deserted. And then, here come the new guys rolling into town, and we had the task of building trust, developing a culture, implementing a system. And I learned a lot from you just watching how you navigated that whole situation, just building that rapport with the team, right? Building a staff. We were a whole new staff for you, myself, Coach Portravina, and Cedric Williams. I mean, you'd never worked with any of us. So, I mean, you had your work cut out for you. We had our work cut out for all of us as a staff. And I'd like to get into some of that, but, just kind of setting the stage for what I mainly want to talk about in this episode. I've had a bunch of coaches and athletes on here come on and talk about X's and O's of training, programming, and methodology. And that's something you do very well. But another thing you do exceptionally well that I really think sets you apart is just your leadership ability, whether it's leadership for a coaching staff or leadership to players for the team as a whole, and all the intangibles that come with that. So I think there's no better way than to kick this off than talking about your two swords philosophy, which is something that I talk about all the time now. So do you mind sharing your two swords philosophy?
Yeah. I mean, that's something I really hold pretty dear to me in a lot of different ways. Not just coaching, but just life in general. I mean, I think that, and I'll explain it, but I think for us as men and as leaders, like there's like the logistics of life, of like, well, I need to pay these bills. I'm supposed to get my oil changed here. I'm supposed to go to the dentist, and my wife is here with this appointment. And then there's the other part of it that's all of the emotion and the spirit and the soul of who you are on the daily and how you make people feel, and to me, it boils down to the art of coaching versus the science and its application, and I read a book when I was in college. My head coach, Keith Otterbein, great coach. And we all had to read a book as a team. And it was the Book of Five Rings by Miyamoto Musashi. Now, Musashi, and I'm not a historian, but from my background of studying him, he was a general in the army, but he was one of the first people to teach dueling swordsmanship. And if we're samurais, and samurais, back then they fought to the death. Like the whole point was one of you is going to live and one of you is going to die. And his methodology was the two swords methodology. And, all samurais have two swords. So there's a defensive sword, which is the katana, and it's much longer, it's thicker, it's not as sharp, but that's for defense, and then there's the wakizashi sword, which is shorter, it's razor sharp, it's lighter, that's the kill sword. So, it's offense and defense. And when I read that, I was like, that's coaching, like that's what we do as strength coaches is the long sword. That's the science. That's the defense, understanding the science of, what all of the research and everything and the literature that's been done from all the way back to the Soviets, from the Bulgarians, from everything that we've learned into the modern era of conjugate training and all of the different methodologies that are out there. There's just so much science and background empirical evidence of what has worked and what hasn't worked. That's the longsword. That's the defense. That's what we use, to fall back on. But the other sword, that offensive sword, that's the art of coaching. And like, to be a great strength coach, both swords have to be extremely sharp. You can be a good strength coach with just one, but I don't think you'll ever break into being a great coach unless you have both, because the athletes are always going to be able to know the truth about you. Like, okay, he's really good. I might go to him for this, but I'm not going to let him lead me because he's not, from a coaching standpoint, I don't trust him, or I don't have the relationship with him, and then you've got some strength coaches that are great with motivation, great with relationship buildings and pushing guys really hard, and loving them harder, but they can't program. They don't understand the basics, at least, so I think for me, I tried to strengthen my swords as much as I could before I became a head strength coach. And I did that through running intern development programs. And the best way to learn is by teaching. So that's how I try to stay sharp, is just by teaching as much as I can. But like, once you become a head strength coach, it gets pretty hard to still maintain all those teaching sessions. And, so that's probably a whole nother topic. But that two swords philosophy is something that parallels into my personal life. It's something that I think is really, really important for us to understand. We would reference it, John, you and I, we would constantly reference, hey, this is, our long sword in this phase was really good, but our short sword was, we needed more culture there. We needed a theme. We needed something, to drive it home for the players. And so it wasn't just, hey, weigh in, train your neck, squat, stretch, and leave.
Right.
There's more to it underlying. And I think there has to be short sword and the art of it for those players to really engage the training long term, because after that second and third week of the block comes in, like, all the glitter and glam of the start is all gone. Now it's back to like, all right, well, who are you on your worst day?
Yeah,
So
no doubt. Well, yeah, I mean, to your point, so I've been on a few different staffs and just worked for and with a number of different strength coaches. And I've seen the strength coach who has the long sword down pat, great with the X's and O's, the programming, the science, but then they don't have the ability to be confrontational. They're not necessarily the culture setter, right? And then I've seen the guy who's the opposite of that, where he's a great disciplinarian, great authority figure, the rah-rah guy, but had a terrible program. And I think you strike that a really good balance of kind of the both of them. And I thought that was a strength of our staff and our program, was we had a very sound program from an X's and O's standpoint. We were constantly talking about methodology and how we could be better in that area, continued education. But we put the utmost importance on the short sword as well, on the intangibles, the art of coaching, the relationship building, the trust factor, the respect, the accountability, all of those things. And honestly, I don't think I've ever told you this. It left such an impression on me, the two swords philosophy. It actually was a big inspiration for my coaching business name and the podcast name, the Hammer and Chisel Performance. So, I've got the hammer, that's the blunt force, and you got the chisel, that's the, the fine tuning, shaping the sculpture. So I've got the training, the nutrition, kind of the bronze and the brains behind it. So I definitely need to credit you for inspiring the name behind that. And it's a philosophy that I've applied to my coaching and my life as well.
that's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah. Do you find that one of the two swords initially came more naturally to you than the other?
Man, that's a good question. Yeah, I think the short sword probably came more naturally to me. If I go back, like when I was a kid, and, like, wrestling was always like my best sport, but that sport just, like, we had the guys in here wrestling. I didn't tell you this. We bought wrestling mats and we got the players in here
So,
wrestling. and teaching leverages. And we got our sons are in there working on it too. It's free. I've actually got my wrestling shoes on right now. I'm trying to break them in.
Let's go.
But when I go back to that, I just remember being on the mat, staying after, and, doing things on my own to just get my mind right and be confident in my abilities. And I remember like watching the Rocky movies religiously and like going out to the barn. Like we grew up on a farm in Michigan, and this is probably some meat-headed commentary, but like I used to wake up at like 2 a.m. in the dark in the winter, and I would go out to the barn and I would just train as hard as I could until I like started getting dizzy or I would throw up. And like there was something about that like I just felt like nobody was going to beat me because nobody else had gone through that. And I did it voluntarily. So I just think that, there was something about that and to training in that way, which was not sound, that wasn't the smart thing to do, but somewhere in my heart of hearts, I'd felt like when I went out to compete, like, you're not beating me because you haven't done what I've done and you haven't suffered like I've suffered. And I think that I've taken that and tried to, carry that over, within our athletes now, because a lot of times it doesn't take much to teach the athlete about themselves. Like our job as coaches is to take them further than they can take themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So find their comfort zone, make them knock on the door, and get out of their comfort zone. And that's where they learn the most about themselves. And people always ask me, well, how do you make them confident? Like they have to, number one, they have to believe in their training and their preparation, but they have to feel like they've enhanced themselves, that they're not the same player they were the year before, that they've gotten better and they've became a better or unbreakable version of themselves. So, whether you're a walk-on that didn't get a shot, that got a shot, I'm going to talk to him and I'm going to talk to him about, hey man, you shouldn't have been here. Like you got a chance to really capitalize. Like people doubted you, man, and try to build on that with them and just get them to push there. And then the guy that comes in, that's the 5-star recruit, that everybody's been telling him how great he is, I'm probably going to, interact with him more like I would with the walk-on, just so, because I want them to maintain humility, because the more talented the athlete is, the less they think they need to earn it. And it's hard for them to keep their confidence because their confidence is already so high. So trying to keep them humble and push them in other ways is how you really can, take him further than he can take himself.
Right.
So I just think you have to, like, the only way to do that is to get to know the player on a personal level. And, you got to have a relationship. And this is something that, it's like the oldest coaching adage, but they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Like,
right.
That shit is it's so true, and I've made mistakes. Like I've made mistakes with athletes when I was younger of fracturing that relationship early and being too hard on them. And then, they don't allow you to coach them because, they don't trust you because you mistreated them or you said something, that hurt their feelings or whatever it was. Try to be as fair as I can, and treat everybody the same because they're on a team, so.
Right. Yeah. I think for me, I was a little bit of the opposite. The long sword, the science, the X's and O's came a little bit more naturally to me. And, my first love was programming, was the pure training side of things. I really had to get better at sharpening my short sword, at the art of coaching, finding my voice, all those things. And I certainly credit you to really helping push me in that area. But, I always had this bias coming up of I kind of wanted the long sword to be the thing that had the biggest influence on the team. Like I wanted the pure X's and O's of programming to be this game-changing factor. in developing players and creating an advantage for the team. But, as I got further into my career, my views on that started to shift a little bit, and working for you really and seeing what we did with Troy really kind of pushed my views over the edge and thinking, I'm not so sure about that anymore. And nowadays, I believe, at least at the college level, that the short sword, the art of coaching, everything that you just talked about, building that trust, pushing players out of their comfort zone, it really seems to me like you can make a bigger impact on the players and on the team as a whole from that side of things. And it's not to say that you ignore the science and X's and O's, but I'm really now in the boat of the short sword, at least, like I said, in college, probably has the most impact. Would you agree with that?
I I do yes, I do believe that. And I think that, like, when you go from January to February, and then you go into spring ball, and then you go into another cycle, and then summer, and then fall, like, you want the culture of the Dale, whether the players are showing up for a 6 a.m. lift or a Saturday yoga session or a team meeting before a game, like, you want those standards to all be consistent so that they feel that they're a part of a team, that there's not this influx of, like, we're just worried about training now and culture doesn't matter. And then when we get to the season, now it matters about, like, team building and things like that. Like, because everybody has to connect. I think that the longer that I have coached, I think that, like, the long sword and the science is maybe not as much of the deciding factor in whether or not you win or lose games.
Right.
And I don't know if I could sit here and tell you that there is a right or wrong way to program. There, there's so many different ways to do it. I think that there's sound and there's unsound. Like, and you don't want to program in a way that's going to injure the athletes. And you have to have great rep integrity with what you do so that you are keeping them healthy and safe. And you need to progress them, as if you're going to be able to train them for 4 to 5 years. So the development piece and the longsword, I think that I've grown in that area a lot over the past few years. I learned a lot of things from a lot of staff members that I've worked with. You especially, you taught me a ton about programming and how you've done things, and specifically the nutritional piece and like how big of a game changer that is. And we've always told the recruits this, but it's the players too. Like, if I had to choose between them eating better, sleeping better, or training harder, like, training harder would probably be the third choice.
Right.
And so what is that? Like, training hard, that's short sword, the intensity and the discipline and the aggression that you train with. But I'm telling them that eating better and sleeping better is more important. That's longsword. I mean, that's science. Like, one is recovery and restoration, and nutrition is the mathematics of what your body is using and what you're ingesting. So I don't know. I think that it's a 1-2 punch, man. I think that, if I had to choose, if somebody made me pick a sword right now, I'm a Wazakashi guy. I'm a short sword guy. And I think that to become great, like some of those strength coaches out there that are considered, great, I don't think that any of them are not short sword guys. Like, and if they're not a long sword guy, like, that's fine. You just got to surround yourself with people that can be experts in those areas,
Right. Yeah. I don't think you're ever going to have a losing season and then look back like, God, if only we had just programmed that squat cycle a little bit better, we would have won all these games, right? No, you probably will look back and say, we didn't have chemistry, or our players weren't tough. They weren't disciplined. Like, those are the factors you can look back on and say, we didn't address that enough to win football games. Right. And then, you talk to any player at the end when their career's done, no player is looking back, just remembering about like all the specific periodization and programming they went through. No, they're going to talk about the hard, brutal workouts that they had to push themselves through, the grinding through the conditioning and the mat drills, and how those things just influence them as men and as players. So yeah, I think the short sword really is, like you said, as long as you have sound programming, which at the college level, if you have a sound program, just these kids are going to develop. Like, I mean, half these kids at their age with their genetics, they sniff a barbell, they're going to improve, right? But it's where can you take them as men, just spiritually, mentally, all these intangibles that can really set a program apart. And I think that's something that you do especially well.
Well, yeah, I think, and that's where the rewarding piece comes for me personally. Like, if a kid's squat goes from 405 to 455, that's awesome. That doesn't, like, I don't think about that when I wake up in the morning. I think about, man, this kid 2 years ago was, he couldn't show up with his shoes tied, and like now he's like 15 minutes early and he's leading the group.
Yeah.
Like that's, damn, like I'm really proud of him, and like tonight it's draft day, like there's some guys that I've been able to work with that, could potentially get drafted tonight on day one, like, and like being a part of the recruiting process for guys like that when they were 16 years old, like you get to know them, and, you spend so much time with them. Like 85% of the time that they spend in college is directly related to a strength coach. So, it's more so about the people than it is, when he gets drafted, it's not going to be like, thanks for getting my bench to 315.
Right. Exactly.
It's thanks for having my back, thanks for pushing me. Yeah. That's, and just being able to have a fraction of a contribution to help them reach their goals. Like that's the stuff when I wake up and I'm driving to work, I'm trying to get my mind, that's what I'm thinking about is how do I help this? And then the other side where I know you said you want to touch on it, but I'm not like the staff that is working are equally as important. If I've got 5 people on the staff, like I'm 20% of that. So there's 80% more of our staff members, split up like that have to be as good and impactful with those athletes because that's who they're training as well.
Yeah, no doubt. And I want to get into the staff building here in just a minute, but just to put a bow on the short sword and long sword conversation, when it comes to honing in that short sword, right, the art of coaching, do you feel like that's something you kind of need to be born with it a little bit? When it comes to the long sword, the science, anyone can learn that. If you invest enough time and effort into studying, learning, exposing yourself to different philosophies, those things can be learned. Can the short sword truly be learned? Or do you think, like you at a young age, you were clearly destined for this? Like you had something in you at a young age that separated you, that just competitive, blue collar, hardworking spirit, innate leadership qualities. Do you think there's a little bit of you kind of had be born with that inside you? Now, I'm sure you can develop it and improve it, but I don't know if everyone can get to a level of having a tremendous short sword. You have an opinion on that?
So I think my first thought was that anybody can develop it based off of the environment that they were developed in. I think that we a lot of times are products of our environment, and I think that like from a young age, like my dad was a wrestler, but he owned a lumberyard and my granddad owned a farm, so it was like the work ethic piece was like that was the natural side was the work. And then like, as soon as I started developing relationships with my other teammates in high school and college, that's where I kind of realized like, all right, I'm clearly and this is just, I'm just being honest, like in my head, I'm like, I'm the hardest working, toughest guy in the room because of
Right.
how I go. And like, I saw people like starting to try to catch up to me and develop with me. And, I think that it was just easier. It was easier for me on the short sword side to push, motivate, and hold people accountable, because that's what I was used to. And I do think that you can develop that. I think that the earlier in your coaching career you're challenged in those areas, the better opportunity, the more of a likelihood it is that you're going to develop that short sword. When you get it all the way into your career and you're, getting into your mid 30s, like you probably are who you are
Right.
at that point, and like, I think that in the strength and conditioning world, it's like, there's such an emphasis on times of like, you and I have talked about this at length, but like, well, you're like, the strength coaches are in charge of the juice and the energy,
Right.
and like that is one of the most, I really despise that stereotype, because there's certain coaches out there that like that doesn't come naturally to them. And I've worked with some elite coaches that were not like, they had great short swords, but they weren't loud.
Right.
Like, they weren't the loudest guy. They weren't giving a motivational speech every 5 seconds during the game, but they were elite with relationships. So I do think you can develop it. I just think it has to be challenged early on in life and early on in your coaching career. The further along you get in it, I think that's hard. Where like the short sword, again, that's, if you can learn and you've got a passion to learn the content, you can absolutely strengthen your longsword. And it's not just knowing the information, but being able to interpret what you're reading and then turn it into a blueprint on the program and actually putting all the pieces together and where does this fit versus where does this fit.
Guys, thank you for tuning in and supporting the podcast. I just wanted to take a minute to give a shout out over to my guys at Troponin Supplements. So they're the sponsor of the podcast, and in my opinion, they carry the best supplements on the market, and it's not even close. And they're the one company that I've wanted to align myself with. As a nutrition coach, working with NFL football players, other professional athletes, strongman competitors, bodybuilders, powerlifters, fitness enthusiasts, endurance athletes, I have to be very particular about any supplement company I endorse. And with Troponin Supplements, frankly, it was a no-brainer. These are the products I've been using myself for the last few years, before I ever became involved with the company. I know the owner personally, Justin Harris. He is one of the brilliant minds in the bodybuilding industry, and we've talked, and all he has wanted to do is just bring some of the elite top-of-the-line products to the market, and that's what he's done. So these are the products I recommend and endorse to all my athletes, all my clients. I use myself, and I want to pass this along to you guys as well. So I'm going to highlight a couple products here. First and foremost, we've got the ATP. This is a high dose of caffeine paired with a very powerful nootropic. I take this before work. I take this before I podcast. This is going to give you a great boost in mood, in focus, memory enhancement. You're just going to feel like you took the Limitless pill when you use ATP. It's an effervescent tablet. You drop it in your water, it dissolves, tastes great. The next product, Field Rations. This is the premier intra-workout supplement on the market right now. It's a one-stop shop for all your intra-workout needs. It's based in highly branched cyclic dextrin, contains essential amino acids, electrolytes, tastes amazing. I use this within every training session. Then we've got the Suppressor Max. This is awesome for controlling your blood sugar. It's got a high dose of berberine, but then has complementary ingredients that are going to keep the berberine bioavailable and stay in your system longer. This is the best blood sugar product on the market. If you're bulking, if you're eating a ton of food, if you're using a cheat meal, this is a great product for you. And then finally, I love this one. I've always had sleep issues. Hit the Rack. This is one of the best sleep products I've ever tried. I use it about 30 minutes before bed most nights, and this has been the one supplement that has actually helped me fall asleep and stay asleep. And then of course, we got the Troponin T logo bodybuilding jersey and the hat. We've got great apparel on the site. So guys, check out Troponin Supplements. You can find the link in the show notes, in the bio, or you can simply just Google Troponin Supplements. Use code HECK, capital HECK, at checkout for a discount. Check them out, guys. These are some of the best products on the market.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that comes with experience, right? A little bit of trial and error, seeing it done well, seeing it done poorly. Do you have any advice for just young up and coming strength coaches, how to maybe best put themselves in position to develop that short sword, develop that art of coaching?
I think you got to don't be scared to fail.
Yeah.
Like, don't be scared to get out and challenge a player. I'm not saying confrontationally, but, you know, get out and push them, like, and, and, and coach them, and maybe ask for a little more than what they are giving at the time, and build relationships. Like, you'd be surprised how much confidence a young coach can make. Like, the first time that we put an intern or a graduate assistant in charge of running a warm up or running a station, um, like, they got to get thrown in the fire, and, like, don't be scared to get out there and screw up and look bad. I would rather the guy that goes out there and falls on his face and, like, fails, and I can coach that, than the one that I can't even get him to go.
Right.
Like, you got to get out on stage and get in front of the mic and sing.
Yeah.
And if you're too scared to get on the mic, like, you're never gonna develop. Yep.
Yeah. I remember my moment getting thrust in front of the mic. It was, I was interning for the Carolina Panthers. I was working for Joe Ken. And, he and I were working with the big men position groups. And of course he's leading all of it. And I'm there helping. And one morning he was like, "John, you got the warm up." And I'm wide eyed. I'm stepping in front of the group, and I've got, all pro linemen staring at me, and I'm starting to lead the warm up, and my voice is a little shaky. And then Ryan Khalil, who's a Pro Bowl veteran center, goes, "Hey, John, your fucking strength coach voice sucks." And then from that on, I was like, okay, I gotta come out here with a little bit of presence, a little bit of confidence, project. And, I don't need to be out here providing cutting edge information. Like, I know my role, but if I can just develop that confidence a little bit and just practice, and build up that confidence being in front of these guys, that was a big helpful moment for me. And that was embarrassing at the time, but that left an impact on me.
If that moment had never happened,
Yeah,
how long would it have taken you to develop that voice?
exactly.
Like, that's exactly what I was just referring to. Like, they got to get out there and go. And I think that, I have to do a good job as a leader of the strength staff, like, to put people in position to do that, but, there's got to be, I got to give them an opportunity to do that as well, because a lot of interns or GAs, they don't, well, am I supposed to do, they don't, am I stepping
Yeah.
on toes? Am I allowed to do this? I would rather them, like, be coaching too much, and I got to say, like, that was wrong. You're, like, back off.
Well, I think that's a good segue into some of the staff building stuff. So, this is an area I think you're exceptional in, is developing coaches. And, you pushed me, and I always respected you because I felt like we had a good personal relationship, and I trusted and respected you. But I also, like, you held me to a standard. Like, you weren't a dick about it, but I came in with a level of respect for you, with a mindset of, I don't want to let him down. And I know if I'm not holding up my end of things, like, that's not going to be good for me. So you always struck a good, healthy note of, we all liked you, we all trusted you and respected you, but we all worked hard for you, and you pushed us, and you got the best out of us. So, and when I initially got connected with you, you were having to build a staff from scratch. None of your guys from Houston were able to come with you. So, I mean, you're literally starting with nobody. How do you approach that situation? Like, how do you go about initially building a staff? And obviously, at Troy, you don't have the same financial resources as you might at a bigger program. So, what went into that?
Man, that was kind of one of those back against the wall situations where it was like, all right, we're going to Troy. They've had a lot of success here. I was working with a head coach, with Coach Parker, who I'd never worked with before. I was one of the only people that he hired that he'd never worked with before either. So everybody that came in as coaching staff were very connected and had prior relationships. A lot of them did. And on the strength staff, I hired you. I'd never worked with you. We'd been in the same room for 45 minutes together and talked on the phone for probably 30 minutes. and then I had to hire 2 graduate assistants, one of which was, Cedric Williams. So Cedric he's now assistant D-line coach at TCU, but, I'd trained him for 3-4 years. So like I knew him as a person and his work ethic as a player. And I knew that he had coaching talent, but I didn't know him as a coach, So again, I think that the people that you're around is way more important than like the person that you're around is more important than, what's in their book of knowledge, and then, you lean on the people that you trust. And, I reached out to a few head strength coaches that I trust, and Mickey Marotti at Ohio State said, I got a guy that would do great for you as an intern. And it was John Porchavina, and Porch, was at the bowl game at the Cotton Bowl. This is kind of a cool story, but, was at the Cotton Bowl as an intern for Ohio State. And my assistant director and one of my best friends, Kevin McAdam, was there just watching the game because we didn't make a bowl game at Houston. So he was there with family watching the game. And I said, hey, Kevin, I want you to interview this intern for me for one of my graduate assistant positions. So they connected at the hotel and he interviewed him right there, and I've done that a few times, like had somebody that I trust interview somebody for me in person, and I think that if I really trust somebody, and I get them to interview that way, and then I bring them in an interview, I'll feel great about the hire,
All right.
But yeah, like not knowing everybody, I had to teach you guys everything about, the way that I've done things between RTT Ready to Train, neck training, all the things that, the beliefs of, pausing reps, certain things of like, we all have our little nuances and beliefs and terminology and like your own little language that you've created around your program. I initially I was very concerned. I just with myself of like, Darl, you got to just be patient and teach, and teach and teach and teach. And then as we go and empower, we got to get this thing rolling. So I just wanted everybody to I wanted to teach everybody and be patient, because I want our staff, like the number one thing about developing a staff is making sure that they have skin in the game.
Yeah.
And that they have ownership of our staff and our program, that they have a say in how we do things, that they feel confident that if they have a suggestion, they're not scared to suggest it. Because sometimes you get a really good idea, that maybe came out of a left field, from somebody that wasn't the head strength coach or the assistant director. Like, you want them to be able to have a voice and have ownership, because once you get done programming as a staff, like if everybody's had a say in it, I think that now it's, hey guys, this is our program. It's not me handing you a piece of paper and saying, go coach this. Like, okay, we decided we're going to do trap bar power pull. This was our decision. And now all of us had a say in it. There's no turning back, and I just feel like that forms a team when there's ownership, that we take the blame on things. If something bad happens, we should all feel equally responsible.
Yeah. I always appreciated the fact that, whenever we would meet as a staff, like you said, everyone had a voice. You'd ask everyone's opinion, everyone's voice was heard, and, not everyone always had the best ideas, but everyone got the opportunity to speak up. And, you were always just open-minded to just new ideas, to different perspectives. And I think that allowed us all the opportunity to shine. Do you think it's difficult? Okay, you've got multiple guys, everyone is fighting to get better, everyone wants skin in the game and to have their time in the spotlight. With younger guys, how do you kind of navigate equally distributing roles, making sure everyone's getting their chance, making sure everyone's kind of working cohesively together? I know this is kind of an open-ended big question, but how do you just kind of navigate some of the staff cohesiveness and making sure that everyone is getting developed and not just pouring into one guy and neglecting another, or you know what I mean?
Yeah. That's a challenge at times because the quality of the work is always going to take precedence, so like if I need somebody to take over the GPS reporting, I'm probably going to pick the person that's most qualified, and not necessarily most qualified, but that has the eagerness to do it and
Right.
excel at it. Because it's got to be done right. And, but you also like need to give other people up. Hey, you do the report tonight, or hey, watch him do this so that as times go, we're all able to teach it, and like, um, that does get hard with, cause if you got a coach that's really strong in one area, like, you want to use their strengths and you want to let them shine with what they're good at. Because that adds more skin in the game for them. If somebody's really good with speed training, like, all right, I might let them run, they're going to lead the speed work, and that does get hard with, hey, he needs to develop this long sword. I'll just try to slowly give them opportunities to build their confidence, to teach certain things, so that does become a challenge. And I think that one thing that helps out a lot is doing, like, we would do staff reviews like before or after every block. And I would just sit and be as honest as I could about this, you're doing awesome here. This area though, you're average. So like, what do you think? How do you think you can improve this? Well, their answer may surprise you and say, well, I don't think I'm average there. I feel like I would like to run the neck training station next time and like see if I can do that,
Right.
And then you got to let them sing,
Yeah.
But if you don't have those communications and sit down and have those hard conversations, and those honest conversations, you don't really know. And that's how I had to get to know our staff members on a personal level, so that I, just like a player, like they got to know that I care about them. That's why I try to, we go to Waffle House or we'll go to Hash Shells and eat, or like all those things are important. And like that's the tribe, man. I mean, the strength staff is the tribe, outside of the family, and my Carly knows this, but like, that staff, like that's the tribe, that like, so it's really, it's kind of like a family of like, if somebody's not holding up their end of the bargain, everybody's kind of like feeling that, and we're all pushing to bring them up,
Right.
you know?
And something else that you would do that I thought was effective was you would sometimes like delegate things to me, like, hey, go talk to the GAs and talk to them about programming, or having me run some of the intern curriculum stuff. And it kind of killed two birds with one stone, in that you were putting me in a teaching position. So I was getting better because I was getting to, take on some of that leadership, take on some of that teaching. But then they were getting better too, because I was, talking programming with some of the younger guys, or just passing on some of my knowledge to them. So, you delegated some of those responsibilities that had a trickle down effect that kind of benefited everyone. So I always thought you navigated those things pretty well. But
Also you're really good at teaching and you're very knowledgeable. So let's let John go and drop some knowledge on these guys too.
yeah. Well, let me ask you this. What do you look for in an intern? New interns coming in, looking to get into football strength and conditioning. What are you looking for in a good intern?
I want somebody with a competitive background, and like, what sports did they play and were they competitive? I think that that's really important, because that gives me some insight into if they have a short sword or not, and then, I want somebody with an aggressive work ethic, like not just a work ethic, not just, okay, I'm supposed to do this and then this and then this, and then yay, I did a good job. Like I want, if we say we need to stock the shakes and we got a shake order, like I want the intern that's going and loading the 5 cases, and then he's trying to beat the other interns back to do it again.
Right.
Because he's challenging those around him indirectly. So I would say a passion to learn the content and an aggressive work ethic. Like those are the 2 things that lead to long sword and short sword development. Like if you don't have a passion to learn the content and the science, and you're not passionate about, I'm not saying you got to be passionate about the Krebs cycle, but you got to be passionate about knowing why the Krebs cycle does what it does, and then have a passion of like get excited about understanding sliding filament theory. Like that should get you excited once you click on some of that stuff, because, that's how contraction takes place. And, what does the role of ATP have? Like, so for an intern to learn those things, like if I start seeing the lights clicking, like that's a good sign, that they're not just tolerating the information, but it's lighting up. I think that's a good sign. So I would say an aggressive work ethic and a passion to learn the content. Those are the 2 things.
Yeah. And I know you'd also, always talk about, you want an intern who legitimately wants to be a strength coach. Like not every intern necessarily, some of them come in, they're like, oh, I'm just going to see if I like it. Or, oh, I think I might want to go into physical therapy. I'm just doing this for a class credit. Like you want someone who legitimately is hungry to be a strength coach for their career.
Yes. And like that's, and, while we're on the podcast, like if anybody's listening to this, that's a young coach that wants to be an intern, like my email is bauerd@troy.edu. Send me your resume. And we can connect, because like internships 15, 20 years ago were a big deal.
Yeah.
And and you weren't getting paid, but just being able to be associated. And in the modern era now, like nobody wants to do anything for free, and internships are kind of viewed a little differently. I've got a whole list of people that started as interns for me or for some of my mentors that are head strength coaches now, in all, professional realms, Major League Baseball, NFL, college, special forces, because they started as an intern, So, and I've seen some too that were like, hey, I want to be like that instance of, I want to be a PT, but I really want to learn and understand strength and conditioning. Like if you have a passion to learn the content and you have an aggressive work ethic, I'm probably going to take you on, because later on, what if I need to hire a PT on a staff?
Yeah.
This guy interned for me and he's got his, probably going to give you a go. Now, what you don't want is the intern that just thinks it's cool to be in the weight room and they don't really want to coach. They just want to be, they want to be a fan, or they want to just like that. And I would sniff that out pretty quick, but, you really want to be a coach. Like if we get a recommendation from a coach that I know, even if it's a high school coach or, a local strength coach somewhere, hey, Darryl, this guy really wants to get into coaching. That's a good sign, because a coach recommending you is different than you just sending an email. So,
right. Yeah. I started off as an intern, and I get questions from, people in my following, my audience all the time of, how do I get into football strength and conditioning? Guys, if you're listening to this and you're a prospective strength coach and you're trying to get into this, you just heard it here. Okay. Shoot coach an email. Like you'll have an opportunity. If you go in there with, like he said, a work ethic, you're competitive, you're just passionate about this, you don't need to come in with some extensive knowledge. Like they're going to teach you that there. But there's no better opportunity than getting to intern at a place like Troy, where, this is strength and conditioning in its purest form. You're going to be pushed. You are going to learn. You're going to learn the short sword. You are going to learn the long sword. And you come in, you kick ass, you do a good job. You're going to build some fantastic connections with coach, with John Porchavina, with everyone there. So seriously, guys, if you are looking to get into football strength and conditioning, shoot coach an email. But coach, I know I've got one more topic I want to get into, and then I'll let you go. But I just want to talk about setting a culture with a team, you know, when we talked about it, when we got to Troy, brand new staff, none of the players know any of us. And we're faced with this task of we've got a roster full of kids who are kind of looking at us sideways, and we need to gain the respect, we need to gain the trust, we need to instill the culture, the accountability, all those things. And you're starting from pure scratch. How do you approach that? How do you kind of go about strategizing, just building that trust, instilling that culture?
I think the first thing that comes to mind is how do you earn the respect of anybody? Especially as a strength coach, from a player viewing a strength coach, like what do they want? Well, they want somebody when they look at them that they gain confidence in what they're about to do. So be really good. Like, know your stuff, be really good, and teach them why you're doing things. And when you're teaching them those things, like, they got to feel your passion for what you're teaching, you know? It's no different than class. Like if I think back to all my classes, like one of my favorite classes that I took in college was it was like foundations of education. Like, we studied Plato's Republic and Virgil's Aeneid, like the Odyssey, Homer, all the epic novels. Like, that's not what I wanted to be learning. The teacher was so passionate about it. I wanted to learn about it because he wanted to teach me about it.
Yeah.
I felt that he wanted me to know about it, and he wanted to educate me on it. And because of that, I wanted to listen, you know, and I did learn a lot. And a lot of those things that I learned there at Hillsdale, I think have allowed me to be a better learner later on, in my career. But I think that when you're first starting in a new weight room, number one, you have to be authentic and be yourself. Like, you can't go in there day one and put on a front that you're somebody that you're not, because all that's going to wear off in 2 weeks. So you got to be yourself. If you're a loud, commanding personality, like that, you need to be that, you know. But if you're not, you have to be yourself. All right. You have to be passionate about what you're teaching them and be really good. Okay. And then the next area that I think is really, really critical is the ability to, you know, have command and be somebody that they want to follow. And discipline and accountability can't, to me, those are some of the most important things in regards to culture. Because there's no way you can have standards within a program without accountability and discipline, you know? So, you know, what are the consequences for showing up late? Are you, in whatever your consequences that you set, they need to be black and white. There's no gray area, because the second that you allow gray area, the players are all looking around like,
Right.
does it really matter for me? You know, I'm the starting, you know, wide receiver. Like, do I really need to show up on time? Like, is he really gonna, you know, like, I just think that's, you'll gain respect if you hold everybody accountable to the same standard. You're going to lose respect if you do not.
Yeah.
And that starts day one, second one. Like, the second that you're running it, and I think that we did a good job of that, you know, at Troy. Was just day one. This is the standard. This is it. It's not personal. If you make a mistake, I'm not gonna dog cuss you up and down. You know, if you handle your business, with respect, and you own up to what your mistakes are, and you learn from them. And, you know, now if you're a guy that's a repeat offender and it's over and over, and we're having the same conversation 3, 4, 5 times, like, it's going to get harder, you know, it's going to get harder. So I just think those are kind of the things that I focus on, is just trying to hold everybody to the same standard, maintain accountability and discipline, have passion about coaching and teaching, be really, really good. And, you know, I don't walk into a room like I need to earn everybody's trust. I try to just develop relationships.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And I mean, you did that. We did that. You know, I came in nervous about the whole situation. I had never been on a team where we were a brand new staff. And it took a little bit of time. All those things you mentioned take some time for the players to truly see that, right? A few weeks and months of seeing you be the same guy day in and day out, having those instances where they see, okay, it doesn't matter if you're the starting quarterback or, walk on long snapper. If you're 2 seconds late to the lift, you're being held accountable the same way as everyone. And we were unwavering with the standards we'd set, and the players respected that. They really did. And I thought just it took some time, but it was amazing seeing the buy-in start to form from the team. But now that you're entering into year 2, what are some of the differences you're seeing with kind of that year 1 versus year 2? Now, a lot of these guys have been in the program. They know you more, the system, the culture, the accountability, it's all a little bit more established. Are you seeing some big improvements now, year 2 versus year 1?
You know what? I would say that we really are. I just think that, like, when you watch spring ball this year, like the effort that we saw across the board at practice, was there. Like last year, we felt like, well, we've got these 3 guys that are really high output guys, and then everybody else is kind of down here. Like there were spikes of effort and spikes of intensity. And we would have like one day that it was a great practice, and then we would have a rotten practice the next day. Like, I think that right now, like as a whole, everybody is kind of elevating ourselves, and we've got more depth. We've got more competition at certain positions. And I just think that, like, and it shows up on the data. It shows up on the GPS data. It shows up in the weight room data, that there's just a higher grouping. Like our averages are just higher, and there's not as many outliers high to low.
Mm-hmm.
So it's good to see it on the number side back up. But I think that there's just, now that the standards have been set and we've maintained consistency, and we all know each other so much more, and the players are all developing. We're just training at a higher level. We're more accountable, which is the way it should be. Which is the way it should be. And you're turning over, we've had, I think over 30 new players since early on, and we're going to add, 9 more. And I think that, whether it's a transfer portal situation where you're bringing in new people, and like you tell them on the recruiting visit, you tell them day one, this is the standard, this is what's going to happen. And you just got to be open and honest with them, and don't play games.
Right.
I just think that too many coaches want to play games, and like you'd mentioned, being the same guy every day. Like, and that's one thing that I thought that, we've done a good job of as a staff here. Like, those players should never know if you're having a good day or a bad day.
Right.
And I think that as a lead, that allows them, if they come in and they are having a bad day, like they know that we're going to be the same.
Mm-hmm.
So whether I didn't sleep because I was up late with my kid who was sick, or I got a flat tire on the way to work, or my back hurts, my knee hurts, like those players don't care about that.
Right.
But you got to be the same guy. And that's what we signed up for as coaches, to lead them and be consistent. So,
yeah. Well, Coach, I lied. I got one more question for you. I'd be remiss if I didn't touch on neck training a little bit. Quick story. I all my previous stops, we had done some form of neck training, some isometric neck, maybe some neck harness, flexion extension, whatever. You introduced me to manual neck, and I was like, manual neck, yeah, with a teammate and the towel, and you kind of press against them, whatever. You put me through manual neck for the first time, and it was, I won't even try to describe it on here, but it was the most grueling, brutal form of just muscular failure I'd ever experienced. It just completely changed my perspective on neck training. I mean, I couldn't turn my head right for a week. Do you think neck training is something that's underutilized, or just not given the attention and effort that it requires in most programs?
I think that the game of football, if you understand the game of football and you love the game, that you're gonna emphasize neck training in your weight room. I mean, the game is so violent, and concussions are a really, really big deal. They've been around. They're not going away. When I was a young coach, I thought, if I could get their necks big enough and strong enough that they will never get a concussion, and then he'll never miss 2 weeks being in concussion protocol. I don't feel I've got enough wisdom now to know that you can't prevent them all, but I think that you can limit the risks associated with, all those concussive traumas. And I think those subconcussive traumas, the little ones every day that you get in Indy striking a pad, like those all add up. So the philosophy on neck training is a 3-pronged approach. And, I kind of use this analogy, but, as a vehicle, like you and me are both Ram guys. Like we'd ride the Dodge Ram, I'd plug out the Dodge Ram, you know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah. No free shout outs on here. I'm gonna have to edit that out unless they want to sponsor the podcast.
They should. Absolutely. Anyways, but if you drive a pickup truck, like the first thing upon impact that happens is the airbag goes off. That's your neck, your cylinder. You want your neck to be big and thick and strong, so there's more surface area there to absorb and dissipate force. And the next area of neck training is your traps. You've got your upper trap and your lower trap. It's that big diamond shaped musculature on your back that you develop from shrugging and pulling and deadlifting and all those different things that strengthen your traps. That's the suspension of the truck, the vehicle. That's the shock absorption. So when you go to hit somebody and I'm launching into a player, your neck is holding, but your traps is ultimately what is going to absorb that shock. And then the last area of neck training that we focus on is, the scaps and all the muscles around the rotator cuff, within the subscap, the posterior capsule, everything. That's where everything's tied to. So that's like the frame of the vehicle. Everything's bolted to that. That's where all that girdle and everything that's there is tied to. The traps of the suspension and the neck is the airbag. So, that's the approach. We want to try to address those 3 areas every day. Do I think it's underutilized? Absolutely, I do. And I think it goes back to it's not sexy. It's not fun.
Right.
It's not curls and bench, and it's tedious. And there's, we trained it really in 5 different motions: flexion, extension, lateral flexion, right and left, and protrusion, sometimes even a retraction. But that's 6 different movements to train one area. That takes time.
Yeah.
So you have to prioritize it. We've got Sorinex neck machines, which are pretty good. We've had pendulum neck machines in the past, which are really good too. But that manual resistance piece and that goes back to my roots. Just learning that from Mike Gittleson and Mike Joseph as well at West Virginia. There are some principles and rules for how to do manual resistance properly.
Yeah.
That are really kind of a lost art that people really don't talk about. And like today, for the first time, we taught our players today how to do manual neck on each other, because our staff is small right now. Like, we don't got a bunch of people and really don't a lot of times let interns do that. So we slowly have taught our players the rules and, how to do it and where your hands need to be and how to do it safely. And it's one of the best methods to increase the size of your neck is manual resistance training. But ultimately, if you've got a neck machine, now you can make it systematic and you can program that just like you program anything else and make it progressive and have a high volume day and a strength day and, mixing in all your trap and scap work. I mean, to me, I think that anytime that somebody gets a concussion, my first thought is always, was he strong enough? Like, could we have prevented that?
Right.
And, I think the national average for concussions every year is somewhere between like 12 and 15 for a Division I program. Some years you have more than others but there was one year I had where we only had 3, and then, and even if they do get a concussion, maybe it's it's just more minor. It's not as severe.
Right.
Because there's been, how many guys have retired from concussions in college?
Too many.
like especially, in the NFL, it's a major concern. So like I said, if you love the game of football, like you're going to address neck training, and that doesn't, whether you're in the NFL or in high school, like the physicality is really, from a G-force standpoint, even down into middle school football, like there's some really violent hits that happen.
Yeah.
And the helmet a lot of time is not enough. So we want to, that's the one area that we can protect them as people from their brain, and their brain health, and not just as a player. So it's critical. It's very critical.
Yeah, I agree. And you changed my perspective on neck training. I was kind of a product of my previous environments of, checking the box, knowing you should do it. But then I thought your neck training philosophy was by far the best I've seen. And now I have a much different view on it. And especially with the manual neck, that was a huge game changer for me. But Coach, I know you're very busy. You've got a lot going on. So I'm going to let you go here. But I just want you to know you've made a huge impact on me. It was an honor to work for you. I miss you guys all the time. And I know you've had a huge impact on all of your players and all the coaches who have worked with you and worked under you. So thanks so much for coming on.
No, I was excited to come on and, miss being able to chop it up with you. It's been fun and enlightening just to talk training with you again. And, like I said, you've made an impact on me as well. To be honest, like there's been, a lot that I've learned from in the nutrition side and just the programming side in general. I'm trying to get better every day and learn, and I've learned a lot from you. So this podcast is going to blow up. Porch and I were just talking about you yesterday. Like, who else out there is as knowledgeable as you are, but has the experience that you have, and it has nothing to do with, the fact that you're an absolute, Greek god. So, so that, I just think the world of you, and I think that there's going to be a bright future for you, as you're going forward with this for sure.
Coach, you're making me blush. I appreciate it. Well, guys, tune in, watch the Troy Trojans this season. I think that was one of the hard things about walking away was I was like, God, I know Troy is a program that is on the rise, and I know it's going to be a big breakout season for you guys. So I'll be tuning in, cheering for you guys hard. And guys, go ahead and stay tuned for more episodes of the podcast coming out every Tuesday. You can follow me on Instagram for daily training and nutrition content. You can go to my website, hammerchiselperformance.com, for my training programs, ebooks, and my coaching services for training and nutrition. But Coach Bauer, thanks so much for coming on.
All right, John. Appreciate you, man.
Yes, sir.